Episode 47, Shiny Happy People, Part 2.
Hey everybody, this is Deborah and Wendy.
Hello.
You are listening to Grace in Real Life, the podcast for Christian women who desire to live out their faith in real life. This week we are talking about Shiny Happy People, Part 2. But before we get started, we do need to say that there are possible trigger warnings. This documentary series discusses pornography, sexual abuse, sexual assault, including those of children. Viewer discretion, listener discretion advised.
All right. And before we even get into the discussion of episodes 3 and 4, remember this is a 4-part docu-series. I want to give you a brief overview of episodes 1 and 2 before we talk about 3 and 4. So if you have not seen the documentary, or if it's been a while since you've seen the documentary, episode 1 really dives into the history of the Duggar family, what Jim Bob was doing before they became TV famous, and exactly how they became TV famous. And then episode 2 dives into the history of the IBLP and Bill Gothard and how it came to be. In episode 3, we talk about they talk about what it means to be under authority and how Bill Gothard and Jim Bob Duggar grow their shared vision into an international empire. And then episode 4 talks about how this movement is spreading and, for lack of a better word, infiltrating political systems and reshaping society in the image of the IBLP.
And social media.
And social media, yes. And the interesting thing about that they pointed out in the documentary is that people are sharing these beliefs of the IBLP without even realizing they're IBLP.
And we started out kind of with my biggest pet peeve, which is that umbrella of authority. And I see that cannot tell you the number of times I have shared with Wendy over the past year, the times I've seen that image shared as in the biblical truth of the way the Bible household should be laid out. And it drives me crazy because there, again, no biblical foundation. So if I'm seeing this all over, we see all kinds of other things that are also in that same vein. And these are that specific imagery, just so you guys know, is actually a direct teaching from IBLP. It's something that they created. It is an image that they created. So yes, people are definitely sharing parts and pieces and things without solid theology, which I'm just going to put a little plug here, guys. Wendy and I have been talking over the past year. The first thing we always tell you is to dig into the Word. Create a quiet time. Spend time in the Word. I want you to understand this. When you spend time in the Word, your level of discernment for that which is not true comes up. And I'm going to use this great example because I heard it the other day. It's a story I've heard over and over. You guys probably already know it. But when we are, and it's probably anecdotal, but I like it, so I'm sharing it anyhow. They always say, like, Secret Service people, they don't study bills that are not the American dollar. They study the American dollar. They know what it looks like, feels like, smells like, the bumps, the ridges, the texture, everything about it, the way the faces look, everything. So when they see a counterfeit, it's inherently ingrained in them that they know it's counterfeit because it deviates from the truth. When we spend our time in the Bible and we are digging into the Word and the theology of it, we will clearly see when something is not from the Bible, or that is in direct opposition, or that is used incorrectly, because we know the truth. So this is not a means of studying something that's untrue. We should be studying the truth because when you know the truth, the dishonesty is easy to see. So that said, we are going to kind of kick off here into under the authority. Now, one of the comments that I read on a couple of commentaries was this idea that there were 7 basic principles. And the most important about all of it was this level of authoritarianism. And I'm actually going to use this in a quote. I will drop a commentary below in the show notes. They say to say that humans are, oh dear, it like blooped. There we go. It says, I don't know what happened. It just blooped on me. I'm reading from a website. It says to say humans are capable of treating fellow humans in such a manner, never mind your own family, is appalling, would be an understatement. However, according to Gothard, there is an umbrella of authority under which God protects us all. He's the highest authority, followed by the man in the family, the mother, then the children, who come right at the bottom. Meaning the man can essentially do anything in his power to make his wife and children listen to him. Added to this, a woman has to obey her father and is under his authority until it transfers to her husband when she gets married. And they actually discuss this in episode 3 when the Duggar girls get married. They're transferring that authority. I think they actually talk about that when Josh marries Anna. And then this kind of goes back to what Wendy said in the first one. And I like this quote, and I will directly quote it. It says, "This is where Bill, who himself is wifeless and childless, relays his misogynistic ideas that children are a blessing and you should have as many as you possibly can because it's God's will," which is the whole fundamental tenet of the Quiverful movement. But again, goes right back into that authority thing. You can hear authority, 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 which is what we're clearly talking about right now, under authority. And they're, I think the commentary on the write-up here is Bill Gothard and Jim Duggar share their growth vision. It's so much more than Jim Bob Duggar and Bill Gothard. Like Bill Gothard, yes, he was the head of it, but there were so many other players. Case in point, I went looking for some stuff. I think Hobby Lobby, one of the biggest organizations, it's commit, like I think they donate one of the largest amount of money, and it goes to IBLP. So we're kind of starting to see some of the math, which Wendy I think touched on a little bit, that a lot of this has nothing to do with anything other than pride and the root of money loving or having money. And you can kind of see this sussed out in how they're pushing people, more seminars, more spread, encouraged growth, and financial resources coming in to the IBLP itself. And they do touch a little bit too on, I think it was in episode 2 where they showed like the churches across the US, but maybe that was episode 3 when they were starting to do the
showing how it was growing. Like it reminded the map of IBLP growing across the country reminded me of the map of a disease spreading. Actually, I don't know a better way to put it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to touch on a little something here just because it's near and dear to my heart as a homeschooling mom. They talk a lot about homeschooling in a very negative light. And I want to make it very clear here. Homeschooling is not IBLP schooling. And I'm going to call them two separate things. Just because they did IBLP schooling at home does not make them homeschoolers, in the sense that they were doing what IBLP wanted. They were using IBLP curriculum. That is they were steeped only in that, what I refer to as super cult. And then homeschooling families, they're currently homeschooling. And let's be real, there's a lot of influence from IBLP movement for homeschooling. But what we can see is that there are homeschoolers of every walk of life now. There are Christian homeschoolers, secular homeschoolers, there are unschoolers, there are classical schoolers. You can find pretty much everything. A homeschooling community is as diverse as the amazing population is here in the United States. And I love that. Actually, it's one of my favorite parts of being a homeschool parent. But I do want to make it very clear that IBLP schooling was billed for the parents and families that involved in this as a homeschool program that was going to set your kids up for massive success, a law degree, med degree. They pretty much had learned all the things. Now, I didn't know anything about this curriculum, so I did go hunting because that's what I do. And you guys know I like research. So I actually found the wisdom booklets that they talk about in this. I didn't find all of them because they are not all out there, at least not online. But I was able to find quite a few of them. They have some interesting things in them, as I shared with Wendy earlier today. They were talking about some Greek language development, so foreign language development. Cool, awesome. Then we dug into a little bit of medical stuff and found some very interesting things. As you guys both know, Wendy's a health coach. I'm a health coach. So, of course, the health thing stood out to me, and it was what I call health light. meaning a touch on the body systems, with this idea to attempt to sort of diminish the body system or the dysfunction in it as a spiritual issue only. And that's clearly not actually a true statement. Just so you know.
No, it is not. And see, what you guys may not know is that the master's degree program that I'm in right now is pastoral counseling. And in one of the books in my courses, it describes pastoral counselors as practical theologians. So we are using the Bible and we are using spirituality to help you um, come to an understanding where God makes you whole again. But it is always about God. It's never about me, the counselor. It's about you, the counselee, in your relationship with God. But one of the things you said something, you just said something, and now I lost my train of thought. It was about, say what you said again.
I said that they were showing the medical side of it as spiritual.
Yes. So in one of my earlier classes, in the foundations classes, is that we had to understand that not every problem is a mental health problem and not every problem is a medical problem. Sometimes they're spiritual, sometimes they're mental health, and sometimes they're physical. But it's not always a spiritual problem. It's not always a mental health problem. It's not always a medical problem. So, as a pastoral counselor, meaning a non licensed counselor trained in theology, I must be able to discern which problem it actually is so that I can best help someone who comes to me. So I can't say, well, you're sick every morning. You must have committed a sin. Like that would just be wrong and totally unfair because that's just literally not how God works. So yeah, that's what you said that and reminded me of that. And I wish I had the book sitting next to me so I could read it to you out of my book. But yeah, as a pastoral counselor, I am basically a practical theologian. And yeah, I have to agree that not every physical problem is a spiritual problem.
And they definitely are trying to like link it to here's this medical thing and here's how you can view it as a spiritual thing. And sure, but why not just put it in the context that it is in? Like we don't, so like I'm going to use this example that I've got one of the wisdom booklets up. I'm going to use this as an example. They talk about strabism, which is just a lazy eye. Okay. You can have two lazy eyes. You can have one lazy eye. You can have one that rolls in, one that rolls out. They actually can do a wide variety of things. It has nothing to do with, you didn't do anything wrong. You've got some muscle imbalances in the way the brain was processing information. So it talks about strabism. And then it kind of talks about how the eyes are not focused on the same object. And then it was like, then it goes literally right into, and it does say that it's a lack of muscle coordination in the eye, which is true. But then it right moves into spiritual strabism takes place when one eye is focused on the Lord and the other is on the world.
Right?
I
may not have MD after my name, but dang, that's wrong.
And they use the reference of James 1:8 where we can't be double-minded. But we're also not having one eye on the world and one eye on the thing. That's actually not how we do this. It's actually not how we participate in the world. And I think they're trying to give an allegory here that they missed the mark on in trying to explain a medical issue and a spiritual issue that are actually just so wildly different. I mean, and don't get me wrong, like learning about the eyes is fascinating. I like it. And I want to say this again, clearly, homeschool programs, those of us that homeschooled in the 90s, we're not the ones that homeschooled in the 80s. We had different curriculum. Most of it was Christian school curriculum, like full on curriculum that was provided, still actually exists today. They still sell it. I was just at the homeschool convention this past week. You can still see, and I would call it a robust curriculum. They mimicked much of what was taught in the public school, taught slightly differently, usually with a Christian emphasis. So you might learn about math and just math, but it also might have a Bible curriculum in addition to it. And so those curriculums were designed for private schools, then they got used for homeschool families in the 90s. And we do know that there is some of the Gothard influence of homeschooling for all of the early parts of some of homeschooling, some of the early stuff. But I would like to caution everyone to say, I've seen a couple things saying, well, all homeschooling was from this. And I actually disagree, because I was one of those homeschooled kids. And while I saw shades of this was never anything that our family was interested in. This was never even the root of why we wanted to homeschool. It just wasn't. So I feel like the documentary took a little bit of a negative kind of turn with the large movement towards homeschooling. And again, there are plenty of non-IBLP people homeschooling, right? You see homeschool movements literally across every demographic, every belief system. And there's a reason that there's a reason people don't want their kids in school. And I should rephrase and say there are reasons, because when you poll people, the number of reasons are wild. It could be learning difficulties. It could be travel. It could be wanting to world school. It could be, some kids are gifted and talented, and some cities still don't have gifted and talented programs, or they've used the money in other ways. Like it's so disingenuous just to kind of throw the sort of negative spin entirely at the homeschool movement. And I feel like they kind of did, but then they would kind of undermine themselves a little bit, because I think some of the speakers commented on homeschooling in a positive manner, not necessarily their IBLP stuff, but in general, like the movement itself. But I feel like it was a little bit of a dig. I'm going to be honest. I feel like it was a little bit of a dig, as if the public school system was the answer to all of it. And I will let that go. I do just think, like, I started looking a little bit about who they were having speak. There was only one pastor.
Right.
And he was very prominent and showcased in this particular one. Also, that women's studies speaker, she was not a theologian. She was a women's studies. I'd like to know a little more on her background.
And so basically,
why she was picked for this documentary.
Right. So basically, this wasn't okay. So documentaries like this, like The Secrets of Hillsong, like Shiny Happy People, they're really more exposés. They're not there to teach you the right thing. They're there to expose what the wrong thing was. And so I think that's why there are no other pastors. That the only reason why that one pastor was there is because he's also a journalist and was actually doing a lot of writing on the subject. That's why you don't see any theologians, because for them that's not the point of the documentary, because the point of the documentary is not to teach you what the Bible actually says about the things that Bill Gothard and IBLP teach. The point of the documentary is to say, look at how crazy and messed up these people are, and we've let them into your homes, and we've let them into seats of power, and oh my gosh, aren't you shocked by this?
I agree. I feel like the same way. Like I said, I watched after watching all four of these, I also turned around and watched the documentary on Warren Jeffs and the FLDS, kind of that fall, and like all the breakdown and why it all kind of fell apart. And you can kind of see roots of the same thing in both of these.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you probably can make some tie-ins from Hillsong. And I know I can make some tie-ins from the Scientology documentary that I watched.
All right.
So let's talk a little bit about this under authority thing, where it had to be in like all the under authority was very hyper focused on females. And I really want to make this very clear. It was very hyper focused towards females. Now, what we didn't see in the documentary, and I clearly am going to say that I probably don't see in the male curriculum, is this idea of males dressing provocatively, males in the community doing things that, took their, can you say virginity for a man?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Virginity, like, I don't really feel like any of that stuff really exists on the male side. It was very female centric. And you start hearing this a little bit, like they had that 6-inch rule. Like everybody needed to be 6 inches apart.
Got to make room for the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Yes. Making, strict dress, Again, I feel directly mostly towards women because male clothing tends to be perceived as the neutral point for
Right.
whatever reason. Like men tend not to be included, even in the public school system when they have dress codes.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from no baggy pants and no, certain profanities and like things like that, they never say, keep your shoulders covered. It might distract a female student. Like
Right.
it tends not to be in that way. It tends to be all directed at women. And so clearly in this particular setup, we also see all of that. So they've got, like I said, strict dress guidelines, strict music guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
They did actually talk about no sex education, which I thought was really interesting.
Right.
But like at home either. So
Right.
So like one of the things that kind of stood out to me as a homeschool mom, also, guys, I've been a birth doula. So birth education and procreation education, for lack of a better description, is something that has been preeminent in our house because I really believe that a robust anatomy and physiology program is
Mm-hmm.
good. Understanding exactly how your body functions, how your partner's body functions eventually, is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Too many people end up in problems or making a baby when they didn't want to, or vice versa. Conversely, not being able to get pregnant when they want to because something is not because something is wrong, but because they have a lack of understanding of which anatomy does what. I
Mm-hmm.
think all of this stuff is really important. And I was really surprised that they actually targeted at home. Like we're not allowed to talk about our bodies at home. Um, no mention of consent, clearly. Authority doesn't have consent because really
Yeah.
that umbrella really states there's the word submission is in there a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I heard that all the time. Submit,
Mm-hmm.
submit, submit. I'm like, okay. And
And
then, yeah,
it's it's very interesting because I was reading a book called Contagious, which I actually recommended to you.
I've read it.
And
I'm reading it. I'm almost done. It's fabulous.
do you remember the story about the drug PSAs
Yes.
and how there was the way in which they did one type of drug PSA actually increased drug usage rather than decreasing drug usage. And I feel like this is the same thing here. When you don't talk about these things, whether that's sex or money or relationships or what have you, when you don't talk about these things, it's not for the betterment of kids because they're going to grow up not understanding how basic things work. If you don't teach your kids about money, they're going to make all the money mistakes. I promise you. If you don't teach them about sex, they're just going to find out on their own, or other people are going to teach them. And then they have no foundation. They have
And
no,
so
they,
much of it is so much which kids find is so wrong. I've heard
they-
crazy things from my daughter's friends. And I'm all like, I'm sorry, but this is literally biologically not true.
yeah. So there was a show, I'm dating myself, called Give Me a Break in the 80s.
I don't know this one.
It was a great show. It starred Nell Carter.
I
And
literally don't know this one. Just so you guys know, I am the same age as Wendy. I don't know.
but Wendy watched a lot of TV. Um,
Deborah did not. I read a lot.
so Give Me a Break. In this show, Nell Carter plays a nanny, more or less, to the family of this police officer. And one of the daughters, gets upset one day because she thinks she's pregnant. And the reason she thinks she's pregnant is because she kissed a boy and she thought that that's how you got pregnant.
Oh, well, that's just not true.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, when parents don't teach, and I shouldn't say we because I don't have any kids, but when parents do not teach these things, there's nothing for your child to fall back on. Last year at our church, we did a whole series called Eden, and we made sure that there were resources available to parents and other adults on how to talk about sex with your kids in a loving and Christian way, not to
And
demean it.
age appropriate. And
Right.
age appropriate.
And not to be puritanical about it, but just to have age appropriate discussions.
Because age appropriate discussions about anatomy are important.
Mm-hmm.
And answering kids' questions and not letting them search things because you didn't answer their questions. Yeah, a whole thing. So let's round out sort of this idea here real quick because there's so many other things we can touch on. So yes, definitely hyper controlled hyperfixation. I actually really like one of the commentaries I found, and basically this idea of Gothard creating a system that points out problems and providing the solution.
Oh, we have to talk about devil sticks.
Oh, and lace necklines.
Yes.
All right, let's hit devil sticks first because that's
Okay.
something else.
So I hate to call it a camp because then that just insults camps. But at this thing where this young lady was, she's telling the story about how when she was younger, she was at this camp, and I put that in air quotes. And the leader, her group leader, was not much older than her, but basically had control over whether or not she had a good experience or a bad experience. And so once a week, they would go to Walmart to get things. And she got a box of tampons because she needed tampons. Well, she got in trouble because how dare she use a tampon that could break her hymen and rob her future husband of taking her virginity? And so she was like, fine, here, you can have my devil sticks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you're taking a deep breath right now to keep from hitting something, so is Deborah.
Again, this goes back to a lack of understanding of human anatomy, even from the parent side.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lack of understanding. This is where we start getting into, concerns. And I understand parents' concerns of not wanting the public school to teach sex education, because the stuff that I have seen for the curriculum, I'm not okay with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the public school goes too far to one direction,
Mm-hmm.
meaning we're in the conversation point of way beyond the anatomy side.
Right.
We're teaching methodologies and all kinds of things that, quite frankly, do not need to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't. And consenting adults can educate themselves further, but when you're introducing things to children, A, it needs to remain appropriate, B, it needs to remain anatomy based. But we have a lot of misinformation clearly across the board, and I hear it from all kinds of people. They'll be like, hey, this is true. And I'm like, actually, it's not. We get myths. This is why I write things about myths all the time. I know Wendy does the same thing with diabetes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we talk about pregnancy myths. Why? Because people have bad myths about it. We talk about breastfeeding myths. Why? Because guess what? There's myths there too. We talk about exercise myths because there's myths. Because the problem is like we have this network of communication and we share things. And just like IBLP, we have seen that, things spread and share and they're not true. So devil sticks there, yes. And that one just that's a whole thing. What was the other one we wanted to talk about before?
Lace collars.
Okay, so wisdom booklets. These wisdom booklets are really interesting. They had little activities, and I actually have not found the wisdom booklet that wisdom. Oh my goodness, I can't speak. Wisdom booklets that were showcased in the Shiny Happy People. I did find some other ones. One of the things that they showcased in Shiny Happy People was basically this hyper fixation on modesty. And they would have pictures of women's dress, and in the wisdom booklets, you would have to circle the thing that was leading men astray. And they showcased something like a 3-inch slit in a skirt that was below the knee. They showcased a lace neckline, and they were in different things, and they went through these booklets, and they would have to circle them. And it was kind of just, again, this goes back.
Shaming.
I was not going to say it, but yes,
it is.
I was borderline not. I'm trying to be nice, but it really is, because what you're doing is you're looking for, again, I know we've talked about this. We're looking for an external link of an internal change. The problem with it is when we humans decide what that external look should look like, we literally step into legalism in honestly the worst way.
Not only that, but this hyperfixation on the clothing that a girl or a woman wears presumes that if something happens to her, it is her fault. And so, speaking as a survivor of sexual assault, there are still too many people who think that what a woman wears means she is begging to be assaulted. And that is victim shaming. And that is so, so wrong. Because if it had anything to do with that, then these fundamentalists, these conservative, whether it's Christian or Muslim or Jewish, then sexual assault wouldn't exist
Sexual
because
assault.
they're so covered and so modest in their apparel. So clearly, this is not about clothing. We
No, it's about
know
power. It's about
we
power. It's
exactly.
this
We
is
know
and
it's
this is what, and I'll be honest, everything through this entire documentary that we're listening to
about. Mm-hmm.
is about power and control. And when you
Yeah.
have power and control and hypersexualization in the, and it's not even hypersexualization in the way that we would look at it from like a media standpoint, right? Like we see hypersexualization in Hollywood, meaning we've gone the other way. Women are naked, women are wearing no clothes, women are very, very sexually provocative. The flip side of that is hypersexualization in modesty, because it becomes a weapon. It becomes a means of power. You're not modest enough. There is never enough modesty for somebody who's looking to exert power.
And
Never.
here's the thing
Sorry,
about
that's
it.
hard.
The irony in our society, like if you look at, for example, the difference between the uniforms of a women's beach volleyball team and a men's beach volleyball team.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we think that the women perform better if they're wearing a sports bra and briefs? Because it's not about performance.
They even say the same thing about women's swimwear. Some of the more modest Olympic swimmers have been wearing like the full unitards and competing
Yes.
and placing well.
Yes.
And there's precedence for it. The men's uniforms are clearly, some of them where I was surprised by the number of men's uniforms when I started to get hypercritical, that they went down to their knees, not just the teeny Speedos. Because one would argue that swimwear is like male swimwear versus female swimwear. Women tend to have definitely more clothing, generally speaking. But that we've seen in recent years, and by recent years I mean the last several Olympics, so probably the last 12 years, a tend towards allowing modest dress. And it's interesting because swimming allows it, but to Wendy's point about the female volleyball players, there's actually a team that requested more modest uniforms and they were denied.
Yes.
So clearly this has nothing to do about performance and everything to do about selling something.
Exactly. If you look at the length of shorts that are available for girls and women to buy, I know, Deborah, you're going to chime in because you've got 2 daughters and this chaps your hide, but it also bothers me too. Like I went to the store last week. I am 43 years old, you guys, at the time of this recording. I am 43 years old. I'm not trying to wear shorts with a 3-inch inseam that look barely longer than my underwear. Okay. So when I got to the Gap outlet and I saw that there were Bermuda shorts, I was excited. I needed 4 pair because I did not want to be without long shorts. And it's not because I'm ashamed of my body. That's not it at all. But again, who am I exposing this for? Like I am married. My husband is the one I want to love my body. And for me, I'm more comfortable in Bermuda shorts. If guys can have longer shorts, why can't I have longer shorts? Because somebody wants me to be sexualized as a woman and therefore have shorter shorts that like we used to only call Daisy Dukes. Now Daisy Dukes are like the norm. All right, Deborah, go ahead.
Oh, it's just I've just been shopping for shorts this past week. My youngest one is going to camp and they have a requirement of longer shorts, but I have been blessed with a child who has long legs. And so regular shorts look short and long shorts look normal. And as my friend said today, because she was like, how are you doing with all like finding like the preparations? And I was like, well, I finally found something. And she said, and I'm going to quote her, I know she'll let me, that she finally gave up and just went to the boys department and bought boys clothes. And I find that insulting. I shouldn't need to buy boys clothing to be perceived as modest because someone doesn't approve of the length of clothing that is universally accepted. The flip side of that is if I want long shorts and real active pockets, by gosh golly darn, give them to me.
Exactly. Yeah, if we could
I
do a whole episode on
I
the
have a
body
hard time
industry.
with both things. Like, you can't demand products that are not, like, you can't demand people wear things that don't exist.
Mhm.
But you also, like, and you can't tell them that what they're wearing is immodest because you don't like it. And that's
Right.
kind of what I see. It's, again, this idea of hypersexuality in, like, this hyper modesty variation. But the problem is you're never modest enough, because
Mhm.
someone will always perceive it as
Mhm.
not modest enough.
Mhm.
We had this issue with my older child when, she has more of a chest, less legs, and bathing suits, they look different on her than on
Mhm.
another young lady.
Mhm.
And then it was, well, you have to wear a t-shirt. You might make someone uncomfortable.
Mm-mm.
And we're now in the process of body shaming.
Mhm.
And again, this kind of goes back, it just drives me crazy. We
Mhm.
tell women we need to love ourselves. We tell women we need to, do all these things, but we literally turn around and hate on everything that we have that's available to us.
Mhm.
And then, but not that it's available to us, that we choose it as if it's a choice.
Right. Right.
That
Because a year ago, at that same Gap, I was not able to find Bermuda shorts. The longest shorts I could find had a 5-inch inseam.
Yeah,
And
because you
so
can't buy what's not available.
right. And so that's what I ended up with. Literally the only reason I was at the store buying new shorts this year, guys, was because thank God I went down 2 pant sizes. So I treated myself to new shorts because I didn't want the things falling off.
So I'm gonna use a literary reference because I like literature, you guys. All right, so I grew up watching Lucy Maud Montgomery's televised version of Anne of Green Gables.
Hmm.
Not the new one, Anne with an E, but the old version. But I had never read the books. So my oldest child, probably about 8 years ago now, we did this book club, and it was awesome. We had these young ladies, and we would pick a different book, and we would read the book, and then we would come to the following month, and we would discuss the book.
Mhm.
And one of the young ladies picked, um, Anne of Green Gables, and I was like, cool, I love the movie. I'm gonna love the book, and I absolutely, unequivocally hated it, and I didn't finish. I know
Mhm.
people rave, because the thing that bothered me the most was in the movie, and Anne gets chastised frequently for looking at herself
Mhm.
and being hypercritical, and they always say we are so vain. In the book, she gets in trouble for looking at herself and
Mhm.
and they call her vain.
Mhm.
But they spend half their time talking about how she looks as adults,
Mm.
and then wondering why she's standing in the mirror looking at herself, not
Mhm.
thinking she's pretty, because they've commented on her freckles, they've commented on her hair color, they commented on her skin color, they commented on how, she's like all these things. And it was
Mhm.
constant, to the point
Mhm.
in which I could no longer tolerate reading it, and I put the book away,
Mm.
and I did not finish. It was the most frustrating thing that I've ever read, because they were angry at the person who was hyperfixated, but the reality was they were, therefore she was.
Mhm.
They were only mad at her for the reflection of themselves. And this is what you see right here in all of these things.
Yeah.
We've got people that were hypersexualizing things that shouldn't have been, therefore they focused on it. Then they became this idea of hypermodesty, and therefore women were always wrong. Young ladies were always wrong. And then we even get crazy nonsense like double sticks and tampons being, oh,
Mhm.
sorry. That just so you know, it's chaps my hide. There you go. I'm gonna let it go.
It's not funny, but it said it was gonna chap your hide, and I knew you were gonna say that.
It's my nice way of being like, it makes me irrationally angry.
Mhm. Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit here, and we'll move away from the modesty portion. We can move into a little bit about the spread of IBLP as we get into the secondary part here that arrows activated.
Mm.
Because I will say most of the under authority was talking about that sort of hyperfixation, talking a little bit about how they managed abuse within the church, and they didn't actually use any outside resources. They thought they knew best.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is to
and
say they did not manage it, and that, the episode also talks about the use of unpaid child labor to
yeah,
help build the empire. It's not as talked about, I would say, as much as the purity culture is, except as it relates back to Joshua Duggar. And when he was a teenager, he was sent away to deal with his issues, shall we say. And in sending him away, he was sent to a place where he was basically performing unpaid manual labor.
And actually, I found that really kind of interesting about the manual labor. And they're basically this idea of like going somewhere and sort of paying penance by doing manual labor. And that actually mimicked some of the stuff that I saw in the Scientology documentary, which I thought was kind of an interesting comparison between the two. They used a lot of unpaid labor from children, where they were trying to elevate themselves as a group and an organization. And then there were child performers and child laborers and child these things and this things. And their parents voluntarily sent them to these things. Believing, guys, I think it's one of the things that's really important here, because it would be easy to throw the parents under the bus. But when you're in a situation like this, and we can look at Scientology, we can look at the FLDS, we can look at so much of it. When you're in a cult, and all of these are super cults, all right? I don't know if that's a real phrase or not. I've coined it, I think. I call them super cults because they're huge, they're far reaching, and there are lots and lots of people involved in them. But you can see the manipulation. You can see the desire for well-being. Like, parents are trying to choose the things that are best for their children. Unfortunately, they're literally just choosing wrong. And it's not like parents are doing these things out of hate for their children. Even in like the Scientology documentary, I think they sent some kids down to like a performing ship down in like Miami or something. My memory on the details is fuzzy. However, like, I listened to the commentary of the parents, and they were just really excited for their kids because they got selected for a cool opportunity. And something that they had hoped would help them in the future. Meaning, you did these programs and they taught you these skills. And let's be real, we all need skills. So it's like all these things, IBLP, FLDS, all this stuff is predicated on this skill set that's going to take you to the next level, that's going to help you grow. And I don't think anybody selects all of this stuff out of just willful destruction. I think a lot of these parents did things like this and sent their kids because they loved them and they wanted them to have amazing opportunities in an area that they felt was safe. I will tell you guys this: safety is an illusion. There is no such thing as safety, ever. Like, we can be prayerful, we can be hopeful, we can sit and rest with the Lord, but we have to understand safety is an illusion. Okay. This does document a little bit, I think, this one about how IBLP comes under fire collectively from the whole, because I think Bill Gothard actually goes to court for one of the victims, and underage sexual assault victim. I believe in episode 3, they talk about that a little bit and how it starts to unravel some of his power. And then Bill Gothard himself, I believe, steps down from the IBLP. And so we kind of see this, but like, let's be honest, he's trained so many high profile people in his organization. I think we know about Jim Bob Duggar and the Duggar family because of TLC. However, I don't think we know who any of the other individuals are. They didn't really showcase anyone else.
Except his brother.
Oh, that's right. They did showcase his brother.
Also a predator.
Also a predator. But they didn't. I thought it was interesting because Jim Bob is clearly showcased. Gothard is clearly showcased. The brother is clearly showcased. But we don't see any of the other individuals that have potentiality of being connected into this, and other what I would call leaders. So clearly ATI, which is the Advanced Training Institute, was run by a group of leaders. Clearly the Basic Life Principles was run by a group of people. And we only see Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar from that perspective. So this is really just written from one viewpoint. And they did not, clearly they didn't do a ton of research into exposing who those other people were. Now, whether it's because they were told they were not allowed to, whether it's because they didn't care to, or whether because they were really just trying to focus on the TLC variation of, it's shiny, happy people, and unearthing all of the information from, 19 kids and counting, and just basically really exposing how this seemingly very pleasant, very Christian, very, like pinnacle family was literally none of that.
Oh, and the other thing that we did not talk about from episode 3 was how the kids didn't get paid.
I thought you were going to talk about blanket training.
No, we are not going there.
Okay, good. Because that one makes
no.
me, I don't think I could handle that one. That one makes me.
No, but the kids did not get paid
No,
as they were supposed to. And they showed copies of contracts where Jim Bob and Michelle signed on behalf of their children that were no longer minors.
In addition to that, I believe, if I recall correctly, based on reading, oh goodness, it was the book was I'm Glad My Mom Died.
Oh, by
what's her name? The
Jeanette
blonde,
McCurdy.
Jeanette McCurdy, and she talks a little bit about a similar. She was not IBLP, but she talks about how her parents didn't set up her Coogan account, and then her parents, basically, specifically her mother, happened to actually steal all of the money that she earned. And I was actually surprised. I wonder if this is, and again, this is just a question, but I do wonder if there's some looseness in the laws not protecting families that do sort of these contracts with TLC, because it's a family contract rather than a child contract. Because I was a little surprised that they didn't have Coogan accounts. I was a little surprised that the parents had signed for their adult children and that TLC had accepted that as a legal documentation. Because I would assume, like for me, I would assume that their legal department would be like, this doesn't count. We know they're adults, because they clearly know they're adults. We see some of the same behavior in the Sister Wives show. The children did not get paid. Clear some of the stuff I find interesting in the Sister Wives. They've talked about some of the children not being on the show and showcased at all, and because they asked not to be, and so therefore, obviously they were not being paid. But they also were like, we don't want to be showcased. And so they did limited numbers of how much the kids were on the television show itself. Mostly it was the adults that were obviously being paid. And I wonder if that fallout is because of some of the stuff that happened with the Duggar family and how their children were clearly taken advantage of. I'll be honest, I am actually a little astounded. I probably ought not be, but I am a little astounded that that there wasn't money set aside.
Yeah.
Like,
and there was a situation where Jill Duggar Dillard is the main one telling.
Is it Jill Dillard or Ginger Dillard?
It's Jill.
Which one has the last name Rollo?
Ginger.
Okay.
But Jill is the one who does the majority of the interviews in the series. So Jill and her husband talk about how when they were being missionaries out of the country, and TLC was like, hey, you guys need to come back. And they're like, no, we don't. And they're like, yeah, it's in your contract. Turns out it was a contract that Jim Bob had basically given to Jill the day she got married. But Jill didn't read. She wasn't able to read the contract. Not because she can't read, but just, I think
just so you know, it's Ginger. I think it's Ginger Vuolo, if I had those backwards.
Jill is the one in the documentary.
Yes.
Ginger is the other sister. Yes. So, but yes. Basically Jill's point was she was only given the signature page. She didn't know what she was signing, and she trusted her parents to her detriment. So when they get back stateside, her husband's having this conversation with Jim Bob about them not being paid. And Jim Bob's like, well, what do you want? $10 an hour?
Oh yeah. That insulted me.
Yeah.
Like minimum wage, not even minimum wage in some states.
Right.
It is minimum wage in my state. But not even minimum wage in a lot of states.
Target pays more than that. Starbucks pays more than that.
It's not even the payment. It's the insult that his wife was required to give birth on television for $10. The slap in the face from a parental figure. Yeah. And that is, it's just, I don't know how she has a relation, or if she has a relationship with her parents, because I don't think I could. Because that's a love. It's another form, because this is just a lot of what you're hearing is another form of abuse. This specifically is called financial abuse. And it is a form of abuse. I don't care what anyone says. It's documented. It doesn't matter. You do not need to be hit in order to be abused.
Right. And so in episode 4, now what we have is this realization that this IBLP movement and the ideals of the IBLP have spread like a disease, like I said before.
I was going to say wildfire causing damage everywhere it goes.
Yes. I just like the disease metaphor better. Because it's 2023. Well, no, wildfires would fit too. Thank you, Canada. But you know, in seats of power in politics, in retail corporations, in a lot of it is political. Social media influencers, your Christian influencers. One of the couples they had on the show was Paul and Morgan, who claimed that that the docuseries was misrepresented to them, so they don't feel like that they were represented fairly in Shiny Happy People. I don't watch Paul and Morgan, so if you're watching this on YouTube and you do watch Paul and Morgan, let us know if you thought they were fairly portrayed, or what is the deal with Paul and Morgan.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what other people say based on observation from the documentary versus observation what they know. And guys, again, I'm going to drive this home. If you're not spending time in your Bible, it is very hard to discern what is true and what isn't, because you don't know. And you cannot rely on someone else to tell you. That's somebody else walking your faith for you. And I'm going to be honest with you, no one can walk your faith for you. Because when you're put to the test, that's you, not someone else. You can't be looking around seeing if anyone else is being like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to do this. Like, because you can be wrong. And we've clearly seen over the past couple of years where social proof, the loudest voice in the room, was not the correct voice.
That's why also in the show notes, you're going to find links to the Verity podcast by Phylicia Masonheimer. She has a blog called Every Woman a Theologian. You're also going to find a link to the YouTube channel, How to Faith a Life, with Faith Womack. She is a seminary graduate as well, and her husband is a youth pastor who often appears in her videos. But yeah, Faith is a great person to learn from about how to read the Bible. Phylicia is a great person to learn from about how to understand and put current events into context. So we highly recommend that you check out those resources as well. Phylicia also has the Verity Conference that's coming up in October in Michigan, I think. But you can attend online, which is what I'm doing. So that link will be in the show notes as well.
Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff. I think that actually, to be honest, I really think that kind of wraps up all 4 of those episodes sort of neatly, if you will. I will say this, if you grew up in an IBLP situation, or you're finding, like I did, a name for some of the things that you saw, and again, communities had all of this. So if you're finding just a name for it, you know, it might take you a little bit of time to understand where it came from. And I will remind you, please turn to your Bible for the truth.
Yes.
Not somebody else, not, you know, just Wendy gave you some great resources. But if you're finding, you know, just kind of like feeling a little bit adrift, dig into that Bible. Because you know what, just talking about this subject and realizing that maybe something that you don't believe, or that you believe is actually not something that you should believe, that's actually really hard, especially as an adult, especially if you happen to be closer to Wendy and my age. You know, we get these ideas that we're fixed, and like we get stronger and stronger viewpoints as we get older. The reality is there's always room to grow. So please do your growing in the Word. I really want you to. And if you just need somebody to talk to, we do have means for you guys to contact us. We would be happy to, if you have something you want to share, we would be happy to do that as well.
And the other thing to remember is, you know, you don't have to, we're not meant to do this life alone. So we're not meant to do our faith alone. We're not meant to experience life alone. So we're trying very hard to build a community here, and we want you to be a part of that community. But one of the things that we encourage you to do if you don't know where to start with digging into the word, is start with our 21-day Foundations of Faith Bible Plan. You can find it at faithbibleplan.com, and it is just 3 weeks of verses for you to read and meditate on so that you can explore the foundations of your Christian faith. Okay, so it's faithbibleplan.com. That link will be in the show notes. Again, it's just 21 days for you to really dig into the word. It's free, you guys. We are totally not charging for this. We just want you to be grounded in your faith. Know what you believe and why you believe it.
And if you have questions or you don't know how to find something, I would really encourage you to reach out to us. Wendy and I, we wrestle with our faith. This is not something we find easy. We learn stuff. We struggle with certain topics. And one of the reasons why we talk about the things that we're talking about is because we wrestle with these topics. Like even watching the documentary, and then all of a sudden I was given a voice for and a name for some of the things that I've seen for a long time that have not sat well with my heart. And for as a discernment principle, like I knew biblically that they were wrong, but I didn't understand where they came from. And, you know, Wendy has listened to me really wrestle with this over the past year, and a large amount of frustration for not being able to pinpoint certain things, but understanding that they weren't right. Like, you guys have to understand, like, this faith thing can be hard. So if you need help finding something, please don't hesitate to reach out. Like, we're not saying that we're paragons of virtue here. We're telling you guys we are wrestling, and that's why we're sharing with you guys, because we want you to understand that real life is messy. Real life requires some mercy and sitting next to each other in bad times and in good times. This is the real part of faith. And you know what? Sorry, go ahead. I will stop.
I was just saying sanctification is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time thing that happens when you get saved. That's not what sanctification is. It is a lifelong process until we reach glorification. So
when we have good examples too, like think about the early church. They came together, they prayed, they came together and sold goods so someone could have something. They came together and they broke meals. They came together in their struggles. They came together in their triumphs. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. And if anyone is telling you that, you know, once you're saved, you've arrived, they're wrong.
No,
they're wrong.
The work is just beginning.
It is. It is, because God has a plan for everyone, and he loves everyone. But that means everyone, despite what a lot of people like to put that little caveat. Well, maybe not. No, everyone. And it's, God does messy, true messy, because humans are messy. And I just want that to be really driven home. If you guys are feeling slightly distressed from this, or maybe a lot distressed from this, you have an ear in us. We're here for you.
So that is actually all we have for today. We hope you have enjoyed this 2-part series on Shiny Happy People, which is available for free on Amazon Prime if you have Amazon Prime. If not, you may have to buy it, but it is a good docuseries. We have warned you about potential triggers. So again, viewer discretion if you want to check that out. So remember also that you can leave us a message at graceinreallife.com, because we have a website now, y'all, where you can leave us a voicemail. You can also leave a comment underneath this YouTube channel on our Grace in Real Life podcast YouTube channel, or you can message us on Instagram at the handle Grace in Real Life Media. That was a lot, but it's all in the show notes. I promise. It's okay. If there's a way that you want to contact us, it's going to be in the show notes. You can also email us at hello@graceinreallife.com if what you need to say is more private in nature or just longer than a 90-second voicemail. Don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and on the YouTube channel. Share this episode with your friends and family and leave us a review, because that helps others find our show and allows us to serve more listeners. And with that, Deborah, will you close us out in prayer?
Yes. Dear Lord, thank you so much for all of the information that we were able to find, the willingness of each of the individuals who were willing to do the brave thing and come and stand forward and share the challenges and the difficulties and the horrifying things that they experienced, so that others can be aware, that their eyes can be open, and that healing can begin. Healing can begin because we are able to give a voice to it. And Lord, I'm just so grateful for those individuals. Lord, I just pray for those that might not have a voice yet. I pray that they start to see what you want them to see, and that they can feel your love. And I just pray for all the rest of us, Lord, then we just have a lot of mercy and a lot of grace, and that we are willing and open arms for people who are struggling and suffering. In your name I pray, Lord. Amen.
Amen. All right. Until next time, everyone. Bye.